This is the Hope Not Note podcast,
where we answer your questions and share inspirational stories to fill your soul with hope.
Our mission is to empower hope to those who have been plagued by note.
I'm Dr. Dylan Caswell.
And I'm Brandy.
And we're here to bring you out of the note and into hope.
Welcome back to the Hope Not Note podcast. We are so thankful that you are tuning in. This episode is going to be a little different. If you are connected to the CrossFit world, you'll kind of already know a little bit about this. But for those who are listening who are not too connected to the CrossFit world, but know that we do talk about CrossFit quite often on this podcast because it's one of our loves and our passions. You may not know about this recent tragedy, but every year in August, CrossFit does the CrossFit Games. I like to compare it kind of to the Super Bowl, but for CrossFit. It's over a few day time period, and typically it's our favorite time of the year because we love it so much. However, this year started off with a tragedy. One of the athletes ended up passing away during the first event, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that. He ended up drowning. There was a run and then a swim, and he drowned in the first event of the weekend. And so we're going to talk a little bit more about that today because we had a question come in about how we can have hope during that time. But before we ask the question, we're going to just start with a moment of silence, of prayer, of just calling to mind Lazar Dukic and the entire CrossFit world, his family, his loved ones, and be present just for a few seconds. Thank you for that moment of silence and for calling to mind his name and being present here. We're going to hop right into the question. So our question is from Tanner, and he asks, in light of the CrossFit Games and the recent tragedy with Lazar Dukic, how does the CrossFit community have hope during this time?
It's a phenomenal question, and it's a hard question to answer because hope is easy to talk about when things are going well. Hope is needed when things are not going well. Hope is needed in the darkness, but sometimes that's the hardest place to have a conversation about it. So how do we find hope in the tragedy of this passing? It's incredibly difficult because there's so much uncertainty surrounding it still. We're still waiting for more facts to come out. And up to this point, there's a lot of speculations. And we don't necessarily want to add to the speculations, but we will just put in there that the hard part around this tragedy is that from viewing it, it'll look like there are so many different ways that it could have been prevented. Yeah. And it seems like CrossFit HQ dropped the ball and delivered nope, because it's tragic that Lazar Dukic passed, but it's more tragic that he didn't seem to have a chance. We reference back to Damar Hamlin with the Buffalo Bills when he went down with sudden cardiac event, and the medical team was there, they were trained, and they gave him a chance to fight for his life here. Where in this situation, that didn't happen. Lazar was close to the finish line, and you see his head bobbing in water, you see him starting to struggle, and then he goes down and it was just completely missed. And there's reports of spectator jumping in the water because they saw it, they're trying to get attention over to it, and it was still kind of missed. So that's one of the hard things. And this is just that they didn't give him a chance. Mm-hmm. And that's hard. And as a CrossFit follower, part of the CrossFit community for years, and a person who served on the 2018 CrossFit medical team in Eastern Regionals, it's hard because if you've been in the community for a while, it's not the first time that HQ has kind of let us down. Yeah. Like what has kept CrossFit going is the strength of the community, the strength of the people in the sport. But looking at it from a professional organization, it's another letdown that we're facing. But one of the points of hope that we can lean into in this tragic situation is community, and leaning on community. And one thing that we do with CrossFit typically to honor a fallen athlete, a fallen veteran, a fallen soldier, a fallen hero, is we do a workout in their honor.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just a way to pay tribute. But more importantly, it's a way to keep their legacy going for years. You know, there is now the Lazar workout. And I hope every year in August on that Thursday that is completed at affiliates around the world for as long as the sport may live, because that's going to help to keep his legacy alive. How do we find hope in this? It's community. But then another point with hope is looking at how do we stop our brains from getting too far into the uncertainty? Because our brains, they work by prediction. And we've talked about this many times on the episode. It helps to explain why placebos work. It helps to explain the pain response. It helps to explain a lot of things, is that our brain works by prediction. When there's uncertainty, our brain is not able to make a good prediction. It's a similar analogy of like, if you're going to cross a river and there's a strong current going, you don't know which step to take. You can't see clearly. But when that river comes, now you can see the stones that you need to step upon to get across that river. Right now in the CrossFit community, that it is a rapid current that is going through. We cannot see the stones. We don't know how this truly happened. We don't know a lot of the different things around it. So it's a very stormy river. So it's not up to us right now to cross that river. It's up to us to be patient and to look at some certainty that we can find in the situation. Now, why do we speculate and why do we want all these answers? Well, we know that it's not going to bring Lazar back. We know that that's not what's going to happen. But the reason we want those things is because then we prevent this from happening in the future. And that's what people want. I mean, think about, anytime someone passes, the first question we ask is, well, how did they pass? And it's an interesting question because the answer to that does not bring that person back. But the reason that we ask that is because, well, we want to know, are we at risk? Mm-hmm. And we want to know, are other people at risk? And if we can identify what caused the passing, well, then we can start to put preventative measures in to hopefully delay the inevitable of the passing. But when we get stuck in the uncertainty and looking for answers when we don't have the facts, it gets incredibly emotional. And I think that's why it's so hard to talk about this topic, because it's incredibly emotional right now. Like the CrossFit Games, they decided to go on. Some athletes competed, other athletes pulled out. Some athletes competed for a few days and then pulled out. And there's so many comments on this is right, this is wrong, this is right, this is wrong. And the reality is that we don't know. Mm-hmm. We don't know. And you can get caught in the uncertainty. When you get caught in the uncertainty, it's a hard place to be. So we have to look at certainty. So what is the certainty in this? And for us as Christian believers, and not to push our belief system onto anyone listening to this, but our belief is that Lazar passed. He did not die. Mm-hmm. He passed because death has been defeated. And that's our belief system. So we know that Lazar, as much as we want him here, we want him to see him compete with his brother at the games, and it's such a tragic situation. But we do know that he's in the kingdom. His close friends, his competitors, they've all spoken to let the community know that he was a believer. Mm-hmm. And if there is some hope that we can gain from this self-agency goals and a framework, that his framework is providing us hope.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's so true. I'm very thankful that as a Christian believer, I don't see someone passing and I feel defeated or I feel hopeless or I feel like lost in the space. Like as a Christian believer, it sounds weird, and I hate using the word excited because that sounds like a little like uncomfortable to say, but I'm excited to get to be joined with Lazar in heaven someday. I'm excited to get to be joined with my family members who have passed or my friends who have passed in heaven someday. Having that framework makes me always remember that I am not made for this earth. I'm made to be here for a short while and to make the most of my situation and my life here, but my life doesn't end here. This is just like the starting point. And really my life, my eternal life will be in heaven someday, God willing. And the fact that I get to look at this situation or other situations, any tragedy is hard, right? Like I've had friends pass away in tragedy, and that is challenging. There's emotions, there's uncertainty, as you said, there's confusion, there's often like a lack of stability and wanting to make sense of what happened. When you get all the details, it still doesn't make sense. Even if you have every single detail, it still doesn't make sense because it's a tragedy and you didn't want it to happen. But being able to look at these different tragedies in our lives and say, I can move forward because my path is also heaven. That gives me hope, but it gives me hope to see a lot of CrossFitters, CrossFit Games athletes speaking on that. Even the gentleman who won the CrossFit Games this year was every time he was interviewed, was very vocal of his faith and his certainty and confidence in eternal life. And as a Christian believer, like that's what we needed as like viewers of CrossFit while watching the CrossFit Games. But I also look at some other athletes who may not have mentioned the Christian faith at all, but the way in which they treated one another on the competition floor was so Christ-like that I couldn't help but be grateful to see that example and that witness. Because the reality is not to get too preachy, obviously, but like as believers, like God himself is community. The Father, Son, Holy Spirit is community. So seeing people, CrossFitters represent community, come together in community was direct correlation, direct reflection of who God is. And that as a viewer of the CrossFit Games, like that was really needed after such tragedy.
Yeah, very, very much so. And like you said, seeing the athletes and now that the games are over and how they've been asking for change. They've been at it asking for change. And it's a shame that it had to come to this in order for change to happen. And we talk about this a lot of like performance, right? Like spreadsheets don't lift weights, humans lift weights. So now HQ has this opportunity to look at where they dropped the ball. And guess what? You can write the best emergency action plan, but if it's not practice, then it can't be put into play. You know, using a football analogy, like the Chiefs won the Super Bowl in overtime on a play that they ran a ton of times in practice. Every person knew their role because of the practice that had been put into that play. You can draw it on a whiteboard. You can have it in a packet. You can have it on a doc. But if people don't know what their role is in that play, then it's not going to be brought to fruition. So I think it's a great time for HQ to look at, and I know that they're doing all the steps that they can to look at this and say, how do we prevent this in the future? Do we need more planning? Do we need more practice? Do we need an independent team? And so the framework that they used this past year that delivered us with Nope, they're going to be able to get the info and change that to hope. And I'll say, if they don't do that, well, we as a community have self-agency to choose not to support that organization anymore. And I know that they're gonna do everything they can to get as many facts as they can and to make the right moves, and they're gonna get guidance, and they're gonna hopefully listen to Brent Fikowski, Patrick Vellner, like the people that are really, really pushing for these changes. Like they have no choice but to listen to it now. And hopefully this creates a much safer competition environment for not just CrossFitters, but in triathlons and Ironman and just any competition that's being held, that people take athlete safety seriously. Like people say it all the time of like, oh, we like athlete safety is the top concern that we have. Well, it's where you spend the least amount of money. It's where you spend the least amount of time. It's not congruent to what you're saying. And I think that's where we can find some hope in this, is that this should create better safety protocols. It also allows us to look and say, what are our values and what needs to happen in order for us to support this thing, to make sure that our actions are aligned with our value. Because if these things are misaligned, then we're living an incongruent life. And if we're living incongruently, that's violating the pillars of hope, which are self-agency, goals, and the framework to achieve.
Yeah. I also want to say, too, that in the midst of tragedy, in this circumstance, of course, but I also want to be sensitive to our listeners who are listening that may not know much about CrossFit, or they're not in that world. With any tragedy, people have to make decisions and choices. And what's going to move forward through tragedy and into hope and into life and light and joy is giving grace to people. Like, and we can fall to this easily of getting frustrated or angry. And sometimes frustration and anger is justified, but being intentional to not diminish character and to not judge someone to the point of no mercy. I think, like, we need to be able to extend grace in the midst of tragedy, no matter what, no matter how hard it is. You don't have to feel grace to extend grace, but people deserve to not be like ridiculed and torn down as if like their life is not valuable as well. Like, I think that would be not my greatest, but one of my desires in the midst of this is that people remember that these are also people too, with families, with friends, with care, with concerns. They're not malicious. They didn't want this to happen. It happened. Tragically, probably could have been prevented. I would say it could have been prevented, but let's be graceful to these people who are carrying the heaviest burdens right now, and realizing that their decision making or lack thereof is in correlation to what happened. And in any tragedy, like, extending grace to that person while still wanting accountability is important, and I would say is essential as well.
Yeah, they're very essential, and everyone responds a little bit differently to these situations. And we can be very quick to anger, but in becoming hope, we make the decision to the best we can to not judge and to not point fingers and blame people.
To respond rather than react.
And to take that minute, let the current calm down so that we can see a little bit more clearly and recognize that we are all humans and we make mistakes. And sometimes these mistakes are a lot more costly than other mistakes. But like, people like judging the paddle boarders, the programming itself, like, this can all be constructive to move the protocols forward. But the reality is, like, nobody wanted this to happen. And so many people are hurting in different ways, and a lot of people feel responsible. I can imagine how the athletes felt when they finished the race and then find out that this happened. And Lazar's in the front. He was in like the top 5, which means that there's a lot of athletes that swam past the part of where he was drowning or had already drowned. And that is a heavy burden to carry of, I could have done this differently. And if I did this differently, Lazar would still be here. Like, there's a lot of different emotions going on, from the spectators, the commentators, the fans of it. And being hope, we need to pause. We need to mourn. We need to grieve this death that happened. Lazar was a phenomenal human being first, and a phenomenal athlete second. I don't remember ever seeing the clip that didn't show him smiling or laughing, joking around and picking up others, but he was a fierce competitor. One of the favorites to be in the top 5, if not podium, this year. He has dedicated his life to this craft. And a lot of us want him back. And we wanted to see him compete this weekend with his brother. and it's hard. But I think the last thing that I'll point to is the hope that it gave us, in the sense of not taking any moment for granted.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we turned on this event and we had like the weekend plan. We were at a conference and we were watching this, and all of a sudden it turned completely. This guy was entering the water, competing with his friends, competing with his brother, and he didn't leave the water. That makes you stop. And that makes you recognize that nothing here is guaranteed. And it made us realize, wow, like, why am I wasting my time being angry? Am I wasting my time working towards something that's not meaningful? Am I wasting my time by not serving other people to a greater extent? But it made you pause and recognize and start to reevaluate what is important to you. I know after that happened, I just wanted to be with family and friends.
Mm-hmm.
Like all of a sudden, like, a lot of work stuff was kind of put to the side. And I was like, I just want to be around community and with people I love. And it sucks that it takes something like this to make us recognize that. But it does bring us back to, like, what are your values and what are important to you? And then are you living out those values in that way?
100%. I'm so thankful, and I really believe that ties into my hope story, and I'm assuming just our hope story in general. That's in the same theme, but CrossFit decided to continue with the games, and so they didn't do any more events on that Thursday, but they did have events all day Friday, all day Saturday, and Sunday. Crowned the champions, had moments of silence and reverence towards Lazar. But as Dylan was saying, like, as a spectator at home, we really just desired to be with family and friends. And I thought it was very special that, well, one of our best friends is visiting for 2.5 weeks. So we got to experience this and have her living with us during the situation. But on top of that, 2 of our local closest friends who we CrossFit with, who come over and work out with us, they came over on Friday, and we had the CrossFit Games on the TV while working out. And I look at that and I'm like, that's what it was about. It's about coming together and really being present to one another, being part of community, caring for one another in community, showing up for each other in the midst of it. I was very, very grateful for that.
Yeah. And just to add on to that, I think my hope story is that in great times, we can have hope. In hard times and in dark times, we can still have hope. But what allows us to have hope when facing adversity, when feeling like we're in those dark places, is the practice of becoming hope before those situations arise. Now, if you don't have the practice in and you're facing adversity in a dark place, hope can get you out of that. But if you've practiced it beforehand, the duration that you need to spend in that time is now likely minimized. So I think it's just a reminder that we can always have hope. And whenever there's no, we have to replace it. And we know that the CrossFit community is hurting right now. They're suffering. We know HQ is hurting and suffering. And we know that what's going to help us move this forward is having hope and becoming hope.
Yeah, and I want to give a quick thank you to Lauren Khalil. She works with Talking Elite Fitness. She commentates different CrossFit events across the country, and she's local here to Syracuse where we live. And we've never really connected with her in person before, but she just said, hey, if anyone's local and available, let's do Lazar's workout together. And we're blessed that we own our own business, and so we're able to adjust, and we didn't have to call off work or anything like that, but we were able to show up at her gym and do this workout with her and one of her friends, and getting to see her, who she's not a games athlete, but she's on the front line. She's interviewing every single athlete, and she's very, very connected to the community. Getting to be present to her of, hey, you're on the front lines, being a journalist, speaking and seeking truth. Like, we got your back here in Syracuse and we're present to you, being hope for you, because you have to be hope for yourself and a lot of other people on a larger platform. And so I want to give a little like shout out and gratitude for her, because she's doing her best, and a lot of people are, but we got to connect with her specifically and do the workout on the 1 week anniversary of Lazar's passing. And I'm just very thankful that we were able to do that together and come together in this specific city.
Yeah, I'll say leaders emerge in difficult times, in crises, and Lauren is a leader in the space for her reporting on it, her seeking of the truth, and her bringing people together to remember Lazar, but to keep his legacy going on. And now if you are in the community of CrossFit, it's now our duty as community members to make sure that his name is not forgotten. That's the last step, I would say, is that we continue to talk about Lazar. We continue to have the memorial workout for him, that each game there's some type of memory or dedication to him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%. And thank you to our listeners who are part of the CrossFit community and those who stuck around and listened to this whole episode. Tragedy is hard, but hope does not disappoint.
Have a great week. And remember, every day is not just a day to be hopeful. It's an opportunity to become hope.
The Hope Not Know podcast is meant for educational, informational, and personal development purposes only and does not constitute any health or medical advice. If you're looking for specific advice, connect with us to work with a Hope coach. The Hope Not Know podcast shall not be liable or responsible for any loss or damage allegedly arising from any information or suggestions in this podcast.